Chapter 4. The next time Scylla saw her minions, it gave her a strangely sour feeling to reprimand them. Now she understood why, years ago, her mother had always seemed so unhappy after punishing her for something, and why her father had never scolded her at all. When the tongue-lashing was over, she gave them a minute. Then she softened her tone and said, "Come here, both of you. Listen up, because I have an idea." They scurried up to her, their faces sallow, and their heads bowed in shame. "I know what's wrong," she told them. "You've had it too easy. You need a kick, something new to keep you busy. I feel it too." Their faces lit up with hope. She could almost hear them thinking, "She's not mad at us anymore." "So we're branching out. We're leaving this town, and we're expanding so we cover the whole county." She splayed her index finger and middle finger and pointed at the two of them. "And you two are going to get there first. Find me customers, find me places to deal, and find me stashes. Report to me here every 2 weeks and tell me the details." She tapped her temple. "Remember them, because I need to know. Do it right, and you get to keep the profits." "We do?" Scylla nodded. "Every credit. So that's your new challenge. Don't mess it up." They disappeared, and things began to feel normal again. 2 weeks later, both of them returned as promised, and as they told her of what they'd seen, their stories reminded Scylla of her first bumbling attempts at a life of crime. 2 more weeks passed, and summer arrived. It was a dry, sweaty evening with a blazing orange sky and insects buzzing around the streetlights. "Evening, miss," came a male voice from behind her, and it didn't belong to one of her minions. It was strong and confident, and somehow identifiably older. She turned around to see the sheriff of Flatbird County. She had seen him before, humming by on his speeder bike at times that were hard to predict. He split his time between each town in the county and seemed to give this town less than an equal share, but he'd been coming here more lately. Scylla had warned her minions to look out for him, and she'd memorized the places he liked to go, and even made a mental note to stay far away from a certain backyard soup restaurant that he seems to like. But this was not one of his usual places, and here he was anyway. She thought fast and furiously ignored him, but he walked up to her anyway. He towered over her, eyes peering down through his rough Nikto face, the way a human's eyes would peer through a mask. "How do you do?" Scylla glanced up at him, then turned away. She had heard that voice before, watching Norin get arrested for trying to rob the grocers. "Is there someone you're waiting for?" he asked. "That's my business." "I ask because it's gotten a lot less safe in this town lately. If your boyfriend doesn't show up soon, I'd suggest you get moving, quick." "I don't have a boyfriend," she said bitterly. "Just an educated guess." They stood silently for a moment. "Miss, can I ask what it is you're doing here?" "You can ask," she snorted. He gave her a minute to answer. His eyes twitched a hair's breadth and seemed to focus on something. "It looks like your pockets are pretty full. You got anything in there?" She narrowed her eyebrows. He thought he was being subtle, but he wasn't. He suspected her of selling drugs. He was right, of course, but that was beside the point. Here was this arrogant bully suspecting her of a crime the minute he looked at her. Accused at first sight. She looked him up and down, wanting to spit in his face. Then she got an idea she liked better. She spotted a blaster pistol on his hip where it was not covered by a coat. She had no use for a blaster of her own, but it would be easy to steal and sell, and it would probably fetch a good price. And if she could get it away from him, maybe she could threaten him with it, just to make him feel stupid. She had never picked anyone's pockets before, but Lowdown had shown her how, and even let her practice on him. She applied what she had learned, and started off by distracting him. She put a hand on his chest. "Look," she said, "I'm just trying to do honest work and make my living." He batted her hand away from his chest, But he didn't step back, and that gave Scylla the opening she needed. Holding eye contact, she groped blindly for the butt of his blaster. There! She found it. As she eased it from its holster, she went on, "I don't know why you're harassing me, but I just want to do what I can for my family." His eyes twitched toward his holster. "Oh shit!" A fist smashed into the side of her head, and she fell flat. Her cheek ground into the dirt. Something seized her right arm, and she looked up to see the sheriff wrap one arm around her elbow, trapping it, while his other hand wrested away the blaster. "Miss," he said, shoving it back in his holster, "do you have any idea what you just did?" Belatedly, she felt the pain of the punch, and she groaned softly. He held up his thumb and forefinger. "You were this close to getting off, and then you try to steal a lawman's gun? I could have shot you for that." "I bet you'd like that, wouldn't you?" she spat. He pursed his lips and shook his head. "I've never shot a girl, and damned if I ever want to." He pinned her arms behind her, and binders clicked around her wrists. "Now you're coming with me, and you can explain to your mama and your papa just what you're charged with." He yanked her up to her feet. Scylla gnashed her teeth. "I don't have a mother. She ran away when I was 10, and now she's probably relaxing on a beach somewhere while I have to suffer like this." "Sure," he said. She turned to look at him. He torqued her arm to prevent her from turning that far, but she didn't need to see his face to know what he was thinking. "You think I'm lying, don't you? Do you think I wanted my life to look like this?" He didn't respond. By now, Scylla knew it would be smart to cooperate, but she could already feel the rage building in her. It started deep in her chest. Then it spread up and down her spine, and by the time she knew it was happening, she didn't care. She spat on the ground. "That's what I think of your puffed-up, high-and-mighty act!" She tried to stomp on his toes, and earned a shove for her trouble. Her wrists strained against the binders, and she cried out in pain. "You're no better than me at all! You're just lucky!" She pulled on her bonds, twisted, wrenched, and shrieked through gritted teeth, but the sheriff had the leverage to keep her trapped. Her fighting would have been useless even if she had been stronger than him, which she wasn't. Soon, her rage burned itself out, and she was left with nothing but a sick, sour feeling in her stomach and a ride to the county jailhouse. In the jail, she had no cellmate. The door was old-fashioned jail bars instead of a force field, and the walls that separated her cell from the others were duracrete, leaving her with no one to speak to. Her father arrived sooner than she would have expected, his eyes full of worry. "Scylla, what did they do to you?" Scylla stood up. She should have been horrified that her secret was about to be blown open, but somehow it barely crossed her mind. Instead, all she could think was, "Finally, someone feels sorry for me." "Dad," she said, and then she stopped. How am I going to explain this? Where do I start? "They say they found drugs in your pockets," he said. "What are they talking about?" Scylla opened her mouth to lie, but then stopped herself. Lying to the sheriff was one thing. He deserved it, she thought, for treating her like a criminal. But for the first time in too long, her father was asking about her life. Her real life, not the mundane fake she'd worn as a mask, and his face showed pure credulity. She found that she couldn't bring herself to take advantage of it. "It's true," she sighed. "I was selling them." "Oh no." "There was a gang," she added. "I fell in with this gang and at first I didn't know what I was doing." The opportunity to blame Lowdown tempted her, but she had already told part of the truth. May as well tell the rest of it, she thought. In for a chit, in for a credit. The rest of the gang got queasy about it and ran off. So I bought their stashes from them and started selling it on my own. I've been doing it since early spring. "Why would you do that? Scylla, you've been doing so well lately. Why did you throw it away?" An accusation. She folded her arms. "I don't know. Why did you throw your life away?" The question was a direct hit. Dell's jaw worked for a minute. Then he gathered himself and said, "You don't want to turn into me, do you?" That, Scylla had to admit, was a good point. Earlier, she would have launched into her tirade about how she deserved better. But her father had heard it before, and besides, she was too tired to stay angry. She just shrugged her shoulders and said, "You want to know why I did it? I'm sick of being poor, and I never liked those dirt-scrabbling yokels anyway, so who cares if I sell to them?" The sheriff, who had been lingering in the corner while they talked, stepped forward and touched Dell's shoulder. "Can I talk with you privately?" They went into the other room, and the sheriff closed the door most of the way, but not all. He started speaking, and Scylla could hear him. "Look, partner, this is pretty bad. Dust is nasty stuff." Scylla slumped down on her bed. Did he leave that door open on purpose, she thought, just to taunt me? "But listen here," the sheriff went on. "I checked the records, and this girl's never been here before. She has a bad reputation, but frankly, I don't give a muckrat's hide about her reputation. I think this arrest has been a wake-up call, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna ask the judge if he'll let her off with community service, and from there, maybe she can get a job." "But she already has a job." "Does she? Great. Make sure she keeps it. Now, a lot rests on your shoulders here. She says you're her only parent. Is that true?" "Yes." "It's up to you to give her the support and encouragement she needs to do the right thing and start living straight. If she starts to mess up, you need to make sure she knows it and corrects it before she does something real stupid. Do you hear what I'm saying?" "Yes." They paused, and the sheriff spoke in that voice men only use when shaking hands. "Then I think we're leaving her in good hands. I'll file the report and we'll get a date. I have a good feeling about you, Mr. Horace. Don't make me regret it." When the judge handed down a sentence of community service like they'd hoped, Scylla and Dell celebrated. Then she realized that it wasn't the great news she had thought it was. Her sentence was to help shore up a river, something about flood control, and her father took away her blade, too. Whether that was his decision or part of the sentence, she didn't know and didn't care. All she knew was that shoveling mud was by far the least pleasant job she'd ever worked. The grit and filth, the blistering heat of working in the summer sun, and the ache in her back and shoulders made her want to pound her shovel into the ground and scream, "I quit!" But there was no quitting a sentence. To get it over with as quickly as possible, she cut her hours at the clinic to a bare minimum, and she even worked on her 17th birthday. With so little money coming in, she once again had to choose between eating good meals and slowly saving money. But even if she did save, it would be almost a year before she could afford even the cheapest speeder bike and make her commute almost bearable. She could have lived with all that, especially because her father had done a better job of staying off alcohol lately. But why did they have to stick me with these stupid droids? "Yes," she thundered at the loader droid. "I said dig, as in pick up dirt and put it down someplace else. I told you 2 hours ago you're digging that side, and I'm digging this side, you worthless bucket of bolts!" "Hey!" She turned around and saw the overseer tromping up to her. "Now we all know these droids aren't the brightest bulbs in the galaxy." He rapped on the loader droid's bulky head to make his point. "But you knew that too. You need to give them simple instructions and then make sure they understand. Now try that again." This work was degrading. Doing it with droids, as if she were just another one of them, was an insult. But he had a point. Swallowing her anger, she pointed across the stream. "That side is the north side." She pointed at her feet. "This side is the south side. You're supposed to dig a trench like the one I'm digging, except your trench is supposed to be on the north side. Stop when you reach the yellow flag. Did you get all that?" The droid waited for an agonizingly long time, staring dumbly at her with its one expressionless eye. Then it warbled an affirmation and stomped off to cross the river. "Good," said the overseer. Scylla had to admit there was something satisfying about ordering around the droids. It wasn't quite as good as having her own gang, but it brought back fond memories. That, thankfully, was the last incident of the day. She staggered back home, swallowed a quick, bland meal, and slumped into her bed. She didn't read herself to sleep. Nowadays, she was always too tired to want to do that. But she wasn't too tired to look at the speeder catalog. She went straight to the cheapest one on display, the LBX-9. It was ugly, but people said it was durable. Riding it would be a whole lot better than walking. How close am I to affording it? It had been a while since she had checked. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would stop by the bank and find out. She left for work earlier than usual, as the bank was on the edge of town just a few minutes' walk from where she worked. When she got to the bank, a simple box of a building with a fancy old-fashioned facade, the weather-beaten old HK security droid crackled, "Salutation! Welcome back, Scylla." Scylla laughed. "We on a first-name basis already?" "Explanation. You have accessed the bank exactly 8 times in the previous 2 months. You have become a regular." A regular at the bank. She said the idea out loud just to taste it. 3 years ago, she had imagined herself frequenting many places, but not this one. It was busy today. At least, busy for an early morning. She got in line behind a frail-looking Nikto woman who waited behind someone else. 4 men and a woman, all humans, lounged around the sides of the room, seemingly waiting for something. A 5th human man, bald despite being roughly Scylla's age, stood at the front of the line, speaking with the teller. Scylla looked for a family resemblance between the 6 humans, but did not find one. The bald human in front of the desk jerked something from his side, and suddenly he had a blaster aimed at the teller. "Now give me what you've got," he demanded. The other humans in the lobby pulled blasters in unison, and one of them screamed, "Everyone, on the ground!" The Nikto startled, then sank to her knees. The humans were not satisfied, and one of them kicked her roughly onto her back. Then Scylla felt a pull on her shoulder. "You," said the woman with the blaster, "on the ground!" And she was thrown face down on the floor. Scylla looked up desperately as she saw the teller hand over one case of credits after another. 2 of the robbers collected the cases and inspected them, while the bald one kept his muzzle trained on her. "Keep them coming," he growled. "We know exactly how much you have in here." Scylla's breath caught. All her money that was not in this bank added up to a few weeks' worth of meals and nothing more. If these robbers got away with the money, she would be ruined. One of the robbers shifted his stance in front of her, and she saw a flash of metal. There was a vibroblade strapped to his ankle. Scylla's last attempt to pick someone's pockets had been less than successful, but she knew how it was done. The first ingredient was a distraction, and with the robbers occupied with the money, she already had that. Now all she needed was to lift that knife before its owner noticed. As she eased her hand up to the bandit's ankle, it occurred to her to wonder how she could stop all 6 of them with only the blade. But she had to try. And where's that worthless droid? The front doors banged open, and a computerized voice said, "Urgent demand. Surrender immediately or be terminated." Scylla grabbed the knife and ripped it away just before the robber whipped around. All 6 of them fired on the HK droid, and 3 of them hit, but the droid's chest plate ate all 3. It brought the butt of its gun to its right eye, swiveled a little, and put a blaster bolt into the base of the bald man's neck. He dropped like a sack. Scylla surged to her feet and punched the vibroblade into the back of the bandit she'd stolen it from. His body bent like a whip. He fired a shot into the ceiling, and he collapsed onto the ground. Adrenaline bathed Scylla's senses, and she forgot everything except stopping the robbers and staying alive. Her fingers felt a protruding button on the knife's handle, and she realized that she hadn't even remembered to turn the vibroblade on. She'd taken a life, and she'd done it with only sharp metal and a thrust of her arm. There was no time to think on that now. There were 4 more bank robbers to go, and not much time to catch them. 3 of them tackled the HK droid, one of them being shot through the stomach for his trouble, but then sparks flew, and the female robber stood up with a vibroblade in one hand and the droid's head in another. Severed wires dangled beneath it, bleeding sparks. A fist smashed into the back of Scylla's neck, and she staggered long enough to watch the robbers bundle the suitcase into their arms and sprint out the door. She regained herself in time to run out after them. They piled into a waiting speeder, and Scylla jumped onto one of the engine pods. A sudden acceleration nearly forced her off, but she grabbed onto the rudder fin and stayed on as they rocketed away from town. She squinted against the hot wind. An insect, or maybe a piece of grit, bounced off her forehead and drew a cut across her skin, but she barely noticed. A blaster aimed at her face. She flailed the vibroblade at it, and she must have switched it on at some point because it sliced the blaster in half. With a push of her legs, she piled into its owner and tried to get her blade into him. She saw the cases of money in the passenger seat, and it occurred to her to steal them back and let the robbers flee. Something seized her neck and hauled her back. With a jab of her elbow behind her, she broke the grip and freed herself long enough to stand up. Then hot pain exploded in her stomach. She crumpled into a ball and tumbled off the speeder. Her head hit the ground, and the world vanished. Scylla slept for a long time. Strangers were taking care of her. She didn't know who it was or why, but she was so tired, and for some reason her body hurt so badly that she did not ask any questions. She spent her brief lucid moments adjusting herself on the bed before sleep took her again. Eventually, she found the source of her pain. A Bacta patch spread across her bare stomach, encrusted with bandages. The strangers replaced those bandages frequently, and the new ones always came soaked in something that reduced the pain to a tingle. Sometimes the strangers would be late replacing the bandages, but she did not complain, mostly because she didn't have the strength to. She began to understand what the strangers said, and they must have noticed because they began speaking to her. "I'm sorry," said one of them. "If we had a Bacta tank, you would be fully healed by now. But the nearest one is 250 clicks away, and we couldn't risk it. It's all right, you'll make a full recovery." Gradually, the pain and stiffness in her midsection went away, and she became able to sit herself up without using her arms. A few times, she got up and walked around the bed just to stretch her legs, but she made a point of doing this only when the doctors were not around. She could not say why. After receiving her lunch in bed one day, she waited patiently while the nurse wiped her mouth and then said, "I can talk now." "Oh, you can!" The nurse, a plump Iktachi woman, seemed to sparkle with delight. "How are you feeling?" It was a question no one ever seemed to ask her. Not sincerely, at least. "I'm doing better. Can probably walk soon." "That's great! Take it easy, dear. From what I hear, you were hit with a blaster right before you fell. That's a lot to come back from." "A blaster?" She thought back, and her memory became clear. "I need to talk to someone who knows what happened." "I'll fetch the doctor." The doctor, a bald, dark-skinned human, hustled into the room. "How are you feeling, Miss Horace?" Scylla smiled a little at being called by her last name. I could get used to this place. But there was something that could not wait. "What happened to the money?" The doctor wrinkled his forehead in confusion. "Before I got shot," said Scylla, "I was trying to get the money back. The money that the bandits took. From the bank." "Oh!" His eyebrows jumped. "Yes, that was you! Our little vigilante!" He patted her shoulder. "Your father is very proud of what you did." "He was here?" "Of course, many times. Don't you remember?" She shook her head. "Well, it was very brave of you, although you didn't have to do it." "That was my life savings. Where is it?" "I'm afraid we don't know." An invisible grip tightened around her spine. "It wasn't recovered?" "No." The grip clenched into a fist. "You should be grateful," the doctor said. "The marshals told me that you were holding an active vibroblade when you fell. If that blade hadn't stuck into the speeder's hull, it probably would have stuck in your esophagus instead." "That money was everything." "No." The doctor's face went cold and serious, and he pointed at her arms and legs. "This, your mobility, your health, your well-being, your freedom from chronic pain, that is everything." Until now, Scylla had sensed an inexplicable closeness with these doctors and nurses. Now the distance opened back up. "Of course you think money is useless," she thought. "You're a doctor. You're rich enough to buy anything." "There must be something for me," she tried. "Insurance will cover it, won't it?" She didn't know exactly which insurance she was talking about, but she had heard someone talking about insurance at one point. He looked pitying. "Not at that bank." "That bank owes me money. I want it back." "I shouldn't be telling you this, but the bank that you defended is now out of business. The owners have nothing." Scylla tried to picture where that left her. She had months of community service still to go and nothing to show for her work but pocket change. After all that. "I'm sorry," said the doctor. "If there is anything I can do for you, let me know." And he left the room. Scylla sat up. That money was the work of 2 years, and now she was exactly where she would have been if she had sat in her room and done nothing. Except if I had done that, I wouldn't have a criminal record. And it all could have been avoided if her father hadn't needed her to put that money in a bank in the first place, or if her mother hadn't walked away from the family and abandoned her to him. Now that she thought on it, Scylla realized that if it weren't for his drinking, she wouldn't have needed to work at all, or walk across town every day, or rob the grocers just to get the pay that Gents had owed her. And if the sheriff hadn't preyed on her, maybe she could have spent that money before those greedy thugs got it all. A minute ago, she had wanted to visit her father and prove to him that she was all right. Now she decided that he could burn for all she cared. She ripped off the Bacta patch, found only slightly scabby skin underneath, and marched out to the lobby. "I'm going home," she told the receptionist. "Are you cleared to leave?" asked the woman there. "Where are your belongings?" "Of course I can leave. Look at me. Now get my things." The receptionist clucked her tongue at Scylla, tempting her to reach across the desk and throttle her. But she checked the records and signed her out, murmuring, "Must be some mistake. It's unlocked now. Go take your belongings." In her locker, Scylla found a dirty outfit and a pouch full of pocket change. And the vibroblade. She smirked. It must not have gotten stuck in that speeder after all. I guess I robbed them back. She resolved to keep it until the day she died, purely to spite them. Outside, she found that she was not in her hometown, but in the next town over. Half of her money was enough to buy her passage back home. It was a reckless expense, but she had just lost a small fortune. Who cares about a few credits? She did not go home. She went to the bank and found an empty shell, just as the doctor had said she would. Then she went to a place on the bad side of town, in the soil under a bridge, to a spot she remembered well, and started digging with her hands. She found the stash of dust that she had abandoned. Once, she had promised herself never to do what she was about to do, but Scylla decided that she deserved a break. Life, she thought, owed her that much. She took a pack of dust from the top of the pile and consumed it.